All right, Mr. Chairman, I think we have everyone and it's 6 o'clock.
Great, let's do it, Josh.
All right. I'll start out with, I mistakenly called out last month as Bob Talboy's last meeting, but tonight actually is. His term expires today, as a matter of fact. So Bob, thank you very much for your service. It's been a pleasure. And you've always given thoughtful and good comments. So we've appreciated your time and we'll miss you.
Oh, thanks, Josh. I've enjoyed it very much and wish you guys the best. I've learned quite a bit, and I appreciate you and your staff working and educating a colorblind lawyer about all these architectural and design features.
You've been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening and welcome to the Boise City Design Review Committee meeting. A few things to start out with for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public attending the hearing virtually has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you will be called upon and unmuted. You will be promoted to panelist and will rejoin the meeting after a slight delay. There is a chat function in Zoom. This is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. If the chat function isn't available for you, you can email zoninginfo@cityofboise.org with any technical issues. Our procedures for public hearings begin with a presentation from the planning team. Then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association, if present, followed by questions from the commission. After that, we proceed to public testimony, starting with those who signed up in advance on the online sign-up sheet, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually or in person. If you are attending tonight through your telephone, you can type *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. And finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. And with that, Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Josh. And with that, I'd like to call the June 9th, 2021 Design Review Committee meeting to order. Victoria, please call the roll.
Marsh.
Here.
Rudin.
Here.
Zabala.
Here.
Talboy.
Here.
Semple.
Here.
Aguilar.
Here.
Zuckerman.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. And at this time, I'd also take a motion on the May 12th, 2021 minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mrs. Ball.
I would move for approval of the May 12th, 2021 minutes as provided by staff.
Thank you. So moved.
Second.
And second, I think, Ben. Victoria, you please call the roll.
Marsh.
Aye.
Rudin.
I'll abstain since I wasn't present.
Zabala.
Aye.
Talboy.
Abstain as I was not present.
Semple.
Aye.
Aguilar.
Aye.
Zuckerman.
Abstain. I wasn't present.
Motion carries 4 in favor.
So now we can move on to items to be considered for our consent agenda. First item we have to be considered for tonight's consent agenda is item number 1. Item number 1 is DRH 21-00138. Location is 7953 West Hargee Street. It's for the construction of 3 new single-story warehouse buildings totaling approximately 60,000 square feet with associated site improvements on a property located in an M1D zone. This item was deferred at the May 12th, 2021 hearing. Is the applicant present? Either yes, I see the applicant isn't present. Are you in agreement with recommended conditions of approval? Please let the record show the applicant is in agreement. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? And virtually, please raise your hand. Josh, let me know if you see anybody virtually raising their hand. We're seeing that there is none. This item will be moved to the consent agenda. Second item to be considered for the consent agenda is item number 3. It's DRH 21-00194. Location is 665 North Mitchell Street. It's to construction approximately 8,831 square foot RV storage building and associated site improvements on a property located in an M1D zone. Is the applicant present tonight? Virtually, please raise your hand if you are present.
Mr. Lopez, you should be able to speak.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, we're in agreement.
Great. So the applicant is in agreement with the conditions of approval. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? If you do, please virtually raise your hand. Seeing none, we will have this item moved to the consent agenda. Next item to be considered for the consent agenda is item number 4. It's DRH 21-00195. Location is 11230 West Joplin Road. It's to construct 2 new single-story warehouse buildings totaling approximately 20,160 square feet with associated site improvements on a property located in an M1D zone. Is the applicant present? Yes, thank you. Are you in agreement with the recommended conditions of approval? Thank you. Let the record show that they are in agreement. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? If you are, please virtually raise your hand. Seeing none, this item will be moved to the consent agenda. Next item to be considered on the consent agenda is item number 5. It's DRH 21-00196. Location is 12565 West Fairview Avenue. It's for the construction of a new 18,314 square foot single-story building for use as an automobile dealership with associated site improvements on a property located in a C2D zone. Is the applicant present?
Yes, virtually.
Thank you. And are you in agreement with the recommended conditions of approval?
We are in agreement. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? If you do, please virtually raise your hand.
Mr. Moss, could you verify if you are here to testify on this item?
I'm here with, I'm for it. I raised my hand as an applicant. I didn't realize we had another representative actually there.
Yeah, no problem. Just
Great.
verifying. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no other members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item, this item will be moved to the consent agenda. The next item to be considered is item number 6, DRH 21-00199. Location is 2801 West Fletcher Street. It's for the construction of a new 7-story mixed-use building with a ground floor commercial, 169 residential units and structured parking with associated site improvements on a property located in a C5DD zone. Is the applicant present?
Yes, the applicant is present.
Thank you. And are you in agreement with the recommended conditions of approval?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? If you would, please virtually raise your hand if you do want to testify in opposition. Seeing none, this item will be moved to the consent agenda. Final item to be considered for consent agenda is item number 7, DRH 21-00200. Location is 12450 West Franklin Road. It's to modify a previous approval to construct a new approximately 165,000 square foot single-story industrial building with associated site improvements on a property located in the M1D zone. Is the applicant present? Please virtually raise your hand if you are present.
I'm here.
Thank you. Are you in agreement with the recommended conditions of approval?
We are in agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? If you are, please virtually raise your hand. Seeing none, this item will be moved to the consent agenda, and that concludes our items to be considered for our consent agenda. And at this time, I would take a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would move approval of the consent agenda consisting of items number 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Thank you. So moved.
Second.
And second, thank you, Ms. Zuckerman. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Victoria, please call the roll.
Marsh,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Sabala,
Aye.
Talboy,
Aye.
Simple,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
First item to be heard on tonight's hearing is item number 2. It's DRH 21-00150. Location is 4351 South Geckler Lane. This time I would turn it over to staff and Caitlin for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. This project is located on the west side of Geckler Lane, north of Amity Road and I-84, and it is south of Federal Way. So we have the family shopping center is approximately here to the north. So that's the Home Depot and the Fred Meyer in there. There's an existing industrial building on the property that will remain. Otherwise, it is unimproved. The new proposed building is approximately 33,000 square feet. And they have it located centrally on the site. The proposed building is a metal building with some large overhead doors. There is a small office portion in the northeast corner that has like a break room and bathrooms. And then the proposed height is approximately 49 feet to the peak. And there are a number of items that the applicant is not in agreement with. So I thought I'd just run through those recommended conditions that they don't agree to. The first is to construct minimum 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk, curb, and gutter along Geckler Lane. The second is to provide a pedestrian connection between that public sidewalk and the office entry. Letter G, to construct the minimum 7-foot wide landscape buffer along Geckler Lane with the required street trees. Letter H, to provide the terminal and interior planter islands within the parking area with the required trees. Letter I, to provide a proposal for blank wall design treatments on the east and south facades. Letter K, to provide site obscuring fencing along Geckler Road. And that's a requirement in the code that any gravel area has to be obscured with site obscuring fencing from the street. And then letter N, to screen mechanical equipment that is on the exterior. So for new buildings or an increase in floor area by 100%, a building does fall within that level 3 improvement requirement in the design review guidelines, which includes the sidewalk improvements. And then the full landscape requirements are required by the zoning code for all new development. And then any development with an increase in 50% or more in square footage. The waiver criteria for the landscape code requires the applicant demonstrate that they can't comply with that code based on the site or other circumstances making those improvements unfeasible. And they also need to show that granting a waiver will not have a detrimental effect on adjacent properties and doesn't conflict with a past approval. And then we did receive some comprehensive planning division comments as well. They would like to see that sidewalk, curb, and gutter installed, and they would like the landscaping installed, including along the street and interior to the parking area. The most recent building in this area was probably the storage project to the north here. They did put in the sidewalk and the street tree requirements, and those are looking pretty nice. And then for industrial buildings, the design review guidelines just require that the building provide a welcoming entry with the weather protection. They are proposing to meet that weather protection requirement. The other requirement is that pathway between the entry and the street. And then we do have the blank walls are discouraged on industrial buildings. So I will, I guess just quickly point out, they do have, this is their floor plan. So they have a large fabrication area and a paint area. And then this is that little break room area. And I believe the applicant is available on Zoom. If we want to turn it over to them.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yes, at this time I would have the applicant present, and if you would please state your name and address for the record.
Sorry about that. So this is Nathan Porter with Levitt Engineering. We're at 1324 First Street South in Nampa.
Thank you.
So got a couple of things that I'm going to share are on my screen, just as some of Can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Okay. So if you can see that now, that's the site that we're proposing. One thing that Yankee Machine Shop would like recognized is that this entire area is owned by them and used as basically one site. And so they are, even though in the tax code they are different parcels, they essentially use it as one site. And they are looking to keep it that way without breaking it up with landscaping and the fencing requirements for the slats. And so, and Caitlin has already shown you most of the other things of, you know, how the building is going to be laid out and the requests that we have for different waivers. Are there any questions that people would like to ask about that?
Questions from the committee for the applicant about that?
Sure. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a question for the applicant.
Yes, Mr. Tubley.
So even though it's being used as one site, there's still a public road that bifurcates that site. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, that was my question.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just to add to that question, does anybody use that road who's not going to that site? I can't tell if it extends beyond it, but I can't tell where it goes. So does it effectively act as a private drive or is it a throughway?
It's a throughway. I think it connects on to Federal Way there on the right-hand side of your screen and then up.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, up on the top across the canal.
Okay, so there are people driving by who will see the property.
I believe it's full right of way. Is that correct, Caitlin?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Porter, other things you want to add or?
One other thing, I figured I would just kind of show you what it looks like right now. Their main entrance to their business is actually here. The new building will not have the main entrance. It will have a couple of offices and a break room, but their main office for the site will be on the east side of Geckler Lane. And this is what it looks like right now in terms of, you know, how it's landscaped and how they.
Yeah, I think we're still seeing the overall.
Oh, are you still seeing the overall?
Yeah.
Let me change that. Better?
Yes, much better.
Okay. So their main office site is over here. in this building on the east side of Geckler Lane. They have existing parking over here that they use for their work on both sides of the street. And this side is obviously currently all gravel, and then this side is paved. So they're looking to keep that as much as they can. We understand that, you know, we need to work with you guys on that. So, but that is what they're requesting at this time.
Other questions for the applicant at this point? Mr. Porter, I guess one of the questions would be, is there any physical or other reasons they can't comply with those conditions, site-specific conditions, that makes it, I guess, unfeasible?
Other than the difficulty of, you know, I guess not really. I mean, there's the difficulty of putting in that much landscape and maintaining it through that area when you have industrial equipment going back and forth. But other than that, no.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions for the applicant, thank you, Mr. Porter. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify tonight? If you would, if you're virtually, please virtually raise your hand. Seeing none. Are there questions for staff from the committee?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Zuckerman.
Thank you. Caitlin, did the applicant give reasons, or I don't have the sheet in front of me for all of the requirements that they don't meet, but we just heard about landscaping. Were there reasons for the other? I assume that the issue with the sidewalk is that it breaks up the entire parcel, but were there reasons for the other, the refusal to meet the other requirements?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Zuckerman, they did provide a letter that kind of just explained their business practices and how they'd like to keep the site as much the same as it is now.
Okay, so that I understand that, but was there anything, no additional discussion with you about hardship or anything?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Caitlin, do you mind bringing up the aerial view real quick again, and maybe just kind of look at what some of the street improvement, is that yeah, can you zoom up to the north side a little bit more? I guess you're not in a, so the improvements, there are improvements on the north side of is that the railroad tracks there? Is that where the storage units are?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
And then is it further up Geckler, are there other improvements that have occurred too as well?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. We do have sidewalk pretty much all the way along there, except for on that bridge.
And then less so as you move to the east and north?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I have a question for Caitlin. Did the applicant come back with any alternate solutions or meet halfway or try to accomplish any of the conditions that were set?
Mr. Chairman, committee member Aguilar, they did agree to some of the conditions on the list, but those that they listed they aren't in agreement with, they didn't provide any compromises on.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So a question related to that. It's unclear to me which ones of these A through N items they are in disagreement with and which ones they are in agreement with. If there's a way to clarify that, it might help us narrow our focus in terms of our debate.
Yeah, I think I took down their contesting conditions A, B, C, H, I, K, and N. Is that right, Caitlin?
It says here ABG.
EBG? Oh, yes. Right there. Hey, that'd be easier. Yep, there you go.
Half of the 14.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask, is there precedent, or Caitlin, is there precedent for excusing some of the requirements or recommendations in an area that, I mean, this is a very different site from the vast majority of Boise. And while I think it's important to add sidewalk and definitely landscaping wherever you can. It's not clear that this road leads to anything. It's industrial, and then it, if I'm not mistaken, ends at the highway. So it would look nice if there was landscaping, and the idea of sidewalks is always nice, but do we think that they'd actually be used there?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, Zuckerman, I think we've been pretty consistently requiring the sidewalk unless there's something specifically prohibiting it, such as an ACHD easement or drainage issues. But we've been pretty consistent with the sidewalk. I think the hope is that even maybe an employee that lives in a nearby neighborhood could walk somewhere or maybe walk up to that commercial center using the sidewalk. Yeah, I can't really think of anywhere where we have waived sidewalk based on lack of sidewalk in the area.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Caitlin, can you show the aerial that's in your report that shows Geckler connecting into Amity? And maybe that'll provide more context. Thank you.
And it looks like this side will be potentially visible from the freeway. That's kind of our gateway into town. Is that? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I have another question.
Yes.
It appears as though the company is using the public road as just a giant passover zone that they can move things from one side to the other. How does ACHD or anybody else weigh in on where curb cuts are at? It looks like it's one giant curb cut there. And as soon as you put in a sidewalk, somebody's got to determine where those are at. And is that an issue for them? We're all cognizant that they want to do their business the way they've always done it and make it as easy on them as possible and all that. And the coming and going of traffic would depend on what their legal rights are to a curb cut along that road. And for now, it's probably undefined because they just go back and forth.
Yeah, was there any comments from ACHD on curb cut? And there's some.
Mr. Chairman, we have not received comment from ACHD yet, so the applicant will need to work with ACHD on all their requirements for roadway improvements. And then, of course, if ACHD requires the sidewalk, they'll have to install the sidewalk, even if we don't require the sidewalk.
And then could you bring up the site plan one more time, please? Thank you. So are they proposing formal parking stalls on site? It's a little difficult to see.
Mr. Chairman, they were not proposing paved parking stalls on the site, so that is a condition of approval, and they said they will work on that.
Okay. Any other questions for staff before we turn it back over to the applicant to address some of these? Seeing none, if the applicant's still present and was able to hear the comments and questions that were made to staff, if you'd like to make any closing remarks, clarifications.
Thank you. So just a couple of comments. We certainly would be willing to entertain any compromises on stuff as you guys were interested in that, and we could work with staff on those. So there's that, and and we will be working with ACHD on entrances and that kind of stuff that need to be done. For the most part, they've got two main entrances in the parking that they currently use. So we would be working with ACHD to try and maintain those.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, it's not clear to me. So they have two main entrances, but as Mr. Rudin said, it looks like it's just dirt back and forth across the main road there. Would adding a sidewalk and I assume curb and gutter, I don't know if that's part of the sidewalk here, restrict the movement of vehicles from one side of the site to the other.
Yeah, they would need to use the approved, whatever comes up for the access points. ACHDs, yep, for their standards for locations and widths of drives and such, yes.
So do we usually, if it's a single property, but there's a new building constructed, do we require this site to be treated as?
Yep, they would probably need to do basically the same. So they would need to have a plan that shows the sidewalk, the street improvements, the access onto the site from with ACHD, which they'll have to work with ACHD for the exact locations of where those access points can be. Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Staff? Seeing none, I'll close the public portion of the testimony and bring it back to the committee for a discussion and a motion. So it seems these are a little bit tricky because this is a very industrial site. It's kind of a contiguous property east and west across a right of way. I think some of the challenges are that the improvements have started on Geckler to the north and have been extended south towards the site. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of precedence not to do the street improvements as are kind of required. Then the questions are, without, the number of terminus parking stalls and some of those kind of things. I think they can work with staff to figure out where exactly those are going to be located, since those aren't identified on the plan. The only ones that might be a little less, I'm not as concerned about the screening of maybe some of the mechanical equipment, since this is a real industrial area. They may have some louvers and other equipment that might be ground mounted or something that, in that case, I could see that potentially being one item we could look at. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of items on these that are unfeasible for the applicant to comply with, short of that it's a potentially inhibits their freedom of crossing Geckler there. Any other thoughts? Anybody want to entertain a motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Simple.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple thoughts. I definitely, as kind of has been brought up, it is a very industrial area. Concerned a little bit about waiving all of the conditions because we hold every application that comes through here to a certain standard based on the improvements that they're making. The site, I know that it says it's really remaining the same, but it's not, because they're building a 33,000 square foot building on the site. It's a little challenging when you're having to do improvements to street frontage. I mean, it's industrial now. It could be industrial for 20 years, but it could get redeveloped at some point in time, and probably will, into something that has a public right of way that in almost every case requires road frontage improvements and landscape buffering. So I agree that some of the other, the mechanical equipment screening, is that necessary when they have a lot of heavy equipment moving around and sitting out in the yard? I mean, I feel like I know which site this is, just having driven out on the freeway enough, kind of knowing where that is in proximity to Broadway. So a mechanical unit, I guess I really wouldn't be too concerned about, but the public right of way improvements, I'd be very hesitant to waive, just because of that's going to set a precedent. And then anyone that develops in an industrial area is going to ask for that same relief. And then I don't feel like we're doing our job as a commission at that point. That's really my thought.
Thank you, Mr. Simple.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, Mr. Pickin.
I agree with a lot of what Mr. Semple just said. I would like to see sidewalks and landscaping along Geckler. The back sides of the buildings I'm less concerned with, because I think driving by an 84, it's fine to see an industrial building. The blank wall, I think is fine. And I don't see a need for a chain link fence with slats because of the area we're in. But to me, it's less of setting a precedent and more of setting our city up for future development. And if we don't require sidewalks and landscape now, then, you know, the next use down the road will see a big gap in the sidewalk and greenery along the streets.
Thank you. Good comments.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I just a few comments. I really don't disagree with what's been said. However, I do think that, you know, and I understand, you know, where the applicant is coming from as well, but I do think that, you know, these, the conditions are, you know, that's within our purview, certainly within the code as to what we should be following and doing. And because they, you know, if the real problem that I see it is you start parceling these things out as, which is echoes what everybody else has said, is that as this grows, this is not going to, this part of town is not going to stay the same. It may stay industrial, but the point is that, you know, the design guidelines are there for a reason. And I think before we try waiving things, which I think would create a mishmash, that we really should look at those. And in reviewing these, I don't really have a problem. I mean, I think they're all fine. I would be willing to, you know, entertain, you know, I understand with some of the mechanical and stuff like that, but I think that we run real risk, or the committee runs real risk, if we start parceling these things out, because this will come back. It's not going to go away. So I just add that as a thought, and that's all I would say.
Member Talboy.
Mr. Chairman, I have another kind of addition, I guess, you know, going back to some of the conversation during the review of this, you know, tonight, because we weren't provided with any sort of alternatives to the conditions, I don't think that we'd be opposed to them proposing some, you know, alternatives to these conditions that staff could then review on a staff level to approve that way, that might modify the full requirement of each condition. But to me, it seems like if we ask for them to comply with these and they can update their design a little bit to either provide an alternative or comply with it, that then staff can review. I think that then protects us, protecting the code and the requirements of the code, where they can demonstrate that they can meet the intent of the code without us waiving something that then could open us up to, you know, a little bit of discussion in the future on other projects that come through like this. And I guess just to continue, I would then move to approve DRH 21-00150 as recommended in the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommended conditions of approval noted in the project report.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Talboy. Discussion on the motion? Straight up?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
would it be appropriate, Mr. Sample, if we included in that motion that just what you were saying, that we'd be amenable to a revised application that address these specific items that you know, the applicant could describe in more detail how they intend to address them?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Rudin, yeah, I think I will amend my motion to include the addition of a site-specific condition of approval O, that the applicant can provide alternative compliance to the site-specific conditions that they have concerns with, provide those alternatives to staff for a staff level review to determine if they are meeting those conditions.
Is the second in agreement with the modification to the motion?
Yes, it is.
Okay, back to discussion. Any more discussion? Hearing none. Victoria, call the question, please. Call the roll.
Marsh,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Zabala,
Aye.
Talboy,
Aye.
Semple,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
And that concludes our items for tonight. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Good
everyone.
evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
You bet. Thank you.
Bob,
Yeah.
see you around.
All right. I'm sure. Good luck.
Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care, Counselor.
I will.